The Lac Mégantic rail disaster. In the early morning of July 6, 2013, a runaway train hauling 72 tankers filled with crude oil derailed as it approached the center of the town of Lac Mégantic, Quebec. The tanker cars exploded and the oil caught fire, killing 47 people and destroying many buildings and other structures in the town center. This is the fourth most deadliest railway disaster in Canadian history. The derailment led to changes in railway transportation safety rules, as well as legal actions against the company and employees involved in the incident. Years after the derailment, rebuilding is still going on, and many of the town's residents continue to suffer from post-traumatic stress. The train was composed of locomotives and 72 tanker cars carrying about 8 million liters of crude oil from oil fields in North Dakota, U.S. The oil was bound for the refineries in New Brunswick. When Thomas Harding parked the train, he kept his locomotive running, which maintained the air brake system. Harding did not, however, apply enough brakes to the train and left it improperly secured on a downslope inland. After Harding left for the night, a fire broke out on the train's main locomotive, which is the engine. Firefighters responded to the call and put out the fire. They also turned off the train's engine. It also includes the parts of the train's brake system. When the firefighters left for the night, the train's air brakes were no longer working because the engine was shut off. Just before 1 a.m. on July 6, 2013, the train began slowly moving on its own towards the town of Lac Mégantic because Harding hadn't applied enough handbrakes. The engine fire was determined to have been caused by an accumulation of oil in the engine's turbocharger following an inadequate repair job to a piston 8 months earlier. Reaching a top speed of more than 100 kilometers an hour, the train derailed as it approached the center of Lac Mégantic around 1:15 a.m. Almost 6 million liters of crude oil leaked from the 63 tankers that derailed and exploded, killing 47 people, forcing the evacuation of about 2,000 people from their homes and destroying a large part of the town's center. Roughly 1,000 liters of oil leaked into the nearby river, raising serious concerns as to the long-term environmental impact on the waterway, wildlife, and communities downstream. Legal consequences, civil procedures. The Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway Company, MMA, which operated in both the U.S. and Canada, didn't have enough assets or insurance to pay damages to the victims and other creditors of the disaster. Shortly after the derailment, the company was forced into bankruptcy in both countries. Victims of the derailment launched a class action lawsuit against many of the companies connected to the disaster, from the owners of the crude oil that was loaded into the tankers in the U.S., down to the companies that owned the tracks on which the train traveled, including the MMA. The MMA bankruptcy process was tied to the class action lawsuit. All the companies accused in the class action were allowed to pay money into a settlement fund for the victims in exchange for their right to be permanently removed from the class action. About 25 companies took part in the offer and gave a total of $450 million for victims and creditors. Only Canadian Pacific Railway, CP, refused to pay into the settlement fund, claiming it bore no responsibility for the disaster, while CP was dropping from the class action lawsuit. Those proceedings were merged with another lawsuit against CP from the Quebec government. Canadian Pacific Railway is the only company left accused, and those proceedings are still before the courts. The criminal trial. In 2014, train engineer Thomas Harding and two other former MMA employees, traffic controller Richard Labret and manager of trains operation Jean Dimitri, were arrested. They were each charged with one count of criminal negligence causing the death of 47 people. The trial began in October 2017 in Sherbrooke, Quebec, about 100 kilometers west of Lac Mégantic. The Crown processor agreed that all three men, in their own way, contribute to the death of 47 people. Harding was accused of not applying enough handbrakes on the train before he left for the night, in addition to parking the convoy dangerously on a slope 10 kilometers away from the town of Lac Mégantic. Labrie was alleged to have failed to properly inquire about the security of the train after it caught fire. Dimitri was accused of failing to take the proper measures to ensure the train was secure. The lawyers of the three defendants argued that MMA did not properly train its employees and a lack of culture of security. Harding admitted to improperly securing the train, but his lawyer said that this was standard practice at the company and that if there had not been a fire and the firefighters had not turned off the train's engine, the convoy would not have moved on its own. The defendants' lawyers argued the disaster occurred because of a perfect storm of unfortunate events. After a trial that lasted longer than 1 month and following 9 days of deliberation, the jury came back and declared all three men not guilty. Changes to rail transportation. The final report into the disaster by the Federal Transportation Safety Board, TSB, noted many problems with the way the MMA rail company maintained its infrastructures and trained its employees. The TSB, however, also said regulatory agencies did not do enough to force the company to comply with federal rules. The governmental transport agencies of Canada and the United States responded to the disaster by announcing a series of security measures that would apply on both sides of the border. Among the changes, the governments set safety standards for new rail cars and implanted timelines for older tank cars to be off the rails and to make better resistant to explosions in the case of a derailment. The authorities also imposed speed limits in rural and urban areas and required trains to have an electric brake system. The impact of the rail disaster on residents. The effects of the Lac Mégantic rail disaster left emotional scars among the people who lived there. Many in the community lost family, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. A study by the Estrie Health Authorities published in January 2017 found that roughly half of the residents continued to suffer from post-traumatic stress more than 3 years after the tragedy. People who lived closest to the blast had the highest rates of post-traumatic stress. Residents say a big step towards healing the scars of the tragedy would be the construction of a rail bypass. Since 2013, many residents had been calling for the train tracks to be rerouted away from the downtown core. The federal and provincial governments reached a deal to finance the project, which was announced in May 2018, with construction scheduled to be in 2019. Lac Mégantic reconstruction of its buildings and other infrastructures is ongoing. In 2019, Lac Mégantic residents criticized media company Netflix for using footage of the rail disaster for entertainment in 2 of its productions, the horror film Bird Box and the TV series Travelers. The production company behind Travelers apologized and said it would try to remove the footage. Netflix, however, said that it would not replace the images in Bird Box. I can speak among the Eastern Township population. We still remember Lac Mégantic and will never forget. All the information for this video, I took it on the website, the Canadian Encyclopedia. The photos were taken from TV channels of the area. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you around the broom somewhere.